My name is Clara Monroe, but for as long as I can remember, those closest to me have called me Claire. At 42, my life's work has granted me a quiet sort of renown I never sought. As the lead conservation biologist for the Meridian Institute, I've spent 2 decades in the planet's most remote corners, studying the delicate threads that hold ecosystems together. My work, particularly with the critically endangered Amur leopard in the Russian Far East, has brought Meridian global recognition and, for me, the Lowell Prize, the highest honor in my field. Today, however, I stood in the polished marble lobby of the state capitol in Olympia, Washington, holding a small, carefully wrapped gift. I was dressed in a simple navy blue dress, a stark contrast to the formal suits and uniforms around me, feeling as out of place as a forest fern in a concrete courtyard. This was the day my younger brother, Leo, was receiving the governor's award for public service, a major milestone in his career. The irony was a bitter pill. I had traveled from a research outpost on the edge of the Siberian wilderness to be here, yet I couldn't seem to get past the registration table. Decades of research, countless nights in mosquito-infested tents, and one of biology's most prestigious awards to my name, and yet, somehow, I wasn't on the guest list. Before I unfold the rest of this story, I want to take you back to the rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest where Leo and I began. Our story is one of shared roots and divergent paths, and of learning that sometimes the most important boundaries we draw are not on a map, but within our own families. Growing up in a small house nestled against the sprawling woods of Bainbridge Island, our lives were shaped by the quiet, towering presence of our father, Dr. Arthur Monroe. A celebrated botanist at the University of Washington, he ran our home not with military precision, but with the patient, methodical curiosity of a scientist. Every walk in the woods was a lesson in taxonomy, every tide pool a lecture on marine biology. He taught us to see the world as an intricate, interconnected system, a philosophy that instilled in us a deep reverence for the natural world. Leo and I, only 2 years apart, were inseparable explorers. We built dams in the creek that ran behind our house, cataloged the species of ferns in our makeshift research plots, and spent entire summers mapping the trails that crisscrossed the island. Our favorite game was Expedition, where we'd pretend to be pioneering naturalists on a quest to discover a new species of wildflower or a rare salamander. Even then, our roles were clear. I was the strategist, the one who pored over Dad's old topographical maps and identified the most promising habitats. Leo was the tireless field operative, the one with the keen eye and the steady hand, who could spot a camouflaged moth on a tree trunk from 20 feet away. "You two have the gift," our father would say, his pride a rare and precious currency. "You see the patterns. You have the patience." Those words were the seeds of our shared dream, a life dedicated to understanding and protecting the world he had taught us to love. When I was 18, I left for Cornell, my acceptance into their top-ranked biology program feeling like the first step on a grand adventure. Leo, still a junior in high school, stood with me at the ferry dock, his hug a little too tight, his smile a complicated mixture of pride and a quiet, simmering envy I wouldn't understand for years. "Don't forget about us little guys back here," he'd said, half joking. My path through academia and into the field was a whirlwind. What began as a passion became a calling. I discovered I had a knack for not just the science, but the complex logistics and diplomacy required to run large-scale conservation projects in politically unstable regions. My professors took notice, and opportunities opened up for me that were as thrilling as they were daunting. By my late 20s, I was leading my first major project in Costa Rica, and by 30, I had joined the Meridian Institute, an organization known for taking on the toughest conservation challenges. 3 years after I left for college, Leo followed a similar path, choosing to stay closer to home at the University of Washington. He was a solid, capable student, but he seemed to lack the spark of obsessive curiosity that drove me. We supported each other at first. We'd trade notes on research papers, celebrate each other's small victories, and commiserate over the frustrations of grant applications. Our calls were a lifeline, a shared language in a world that often didn't understand our particular brand of passion. The first real fissure appeared after I was appointed director of Asian programs at Meridian. I was 34. Leo was working as a mid-level biologist for the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife, a respectable job, but one mired in bureaucracy. I flew home for Christmas that year, full of stories about tracking snow leopards in the Himalayas. "Congratulations on the promotion, Claire," he said, raising a glass of eggnog. His smile was a thin, brittle thing. "Must be nice, flying all over the world while the rest of us are stuck filling out impact reports." "Your work is important, Leo," I said, trying to soothe an ache I didn't fully comprehend. "You're protecting the ecosystems right here in our own backyard." "Sure," he'd replied, turning to look out at the rain. "It just seems like you're always on the winning team." Our mother's death from a sudden illness 2 years later temporarily erased the distance between us. We stood side by side at her memorial, 2 pillars holding each other up against a storm of grief. He held my hand while I tried to deliver a eulogy, his strength a familiar comfort. That night, we sat in the quiet of our childhood living room, sharing stories of her until the gray light of dawn filtered through the windows. "She was so proud of you, Claire," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad has a whole corkboard in his study covered with articles about your work." "She was proud of both of us," I corrected gently. "She kept every single one of your departmental newsletters." He just nodded, and the moment of connection fractured, the space between us once again filling with a quiet, unspoken tension. By then, my work had gained significant momentum. I'd helped establish a massive protected corridor for the Amur leopard, a project that required years of delicate negotiations with Russian and Chinese governments. It was for that work that I was awarded the Lowell Prize. The news was international. I became a face for a certain kind of modern, high-stakes conservation. The ceremony was a grand affair in Stockholm. Leo sent a polite, formal email of congratulations, citing a heavy workload as his reason for not being able to join me and Dad. I accepted the excuse, blinded by the optimism that has always been both my greatest strength and my most profound weakness. I was his big sister. I believed, with a stubborn naivete, that our shared history was stronger than any professional rivalry. The email about Leo's award arrived while I was in a dusty tent in Mongolia, analyzing tracking color data. Seeing his name in the subject line, Governor's Award for Public Service, brought a genuine, unadulterated smile to my face. My little brother was being recognized for his years of steady, dedicated work. I couldn't have been prouder. I found a spot with a satellite signal and called him immediately, my voice bubbling with excitement. "Leo, this is fantastic news. The Governor's Award. Congratulations." "Thanks, Claire," he replied. His voice was pleased, but measured. "It's been a long road." "I never doubted you for a second," I said, and I meant it. "When's the ceremony?" "I'll move mountains to be there." A slight pause crackled over the line. "It's in 3 weeks. A Saturday. At the Capitol building in Olympia." "I'll be there," I promised, already mentally shuffling research timelines and flight schedules. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "You don't have to go to all that trouble," he said. "I know how busy you are with all your important work." There was something in his tone, a subtle emphasis on important, that felt dismissive, but I brushed it aside. It was a bad connection, or maybe he was just overwhelmed. "Nothing would keep me away," I assured him. "This is your day, Leo. I am so proud of you." After the call, I spent the next 2 hours on the satellite phone, rearranging a life that was planned 6 months in advance. I delegated responsibilities to my deputy, postponed a crucial meeting with a conservation fund, and booked a series of flights that would get me from Ulaanbaatar to Seattle with just enough time to spare. It was a logistical nightmare, but it felt absolutely necessary. Family came first. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were a blur of preparation. I found the perfect gift in a small, dusty antique map shop in Seattle, a beautiful, hand-colored 19th-century botanical map of the Puget Sound region, framed in reclaimed wood from a Bainbridge Island barn. It felt right, a nod to his work, our home, and the legacy of our father. I wrapped it myself, picturing the look on his face when he opened it. The night before I was set to drive down to Olympia, my father called. At 74, His mind was as sharp as ever, his perceptions rarely off the mark. "Clara," he said, his voice laced with a familiar concern. "I'm glad you're going to Leo's ceremony tomorrow." "Of course, Dad. I'm so excited for him." He was silent for a moment. "Just be prepared, Claire. He's been different lately. There's a brittleness to him I haven't seen before." "Dad, we're not kids anymore," I reassured him, a little too quickly. "Whatever rivalry we had is long in the past. This is a celebration." "I hope you're right," he said, his tone heavy with doubt. I dismissed his warning, clinging to my vision of a joyful family reunion. That night, I sat on my small porch, looking out at the dark silhouette of the Olympic Mountains across the water. I thought of two small children in bright yellow raincoats, crouched over a patch of moss, completely lost in the wonder of the world. We had both honored that wonder in our own ways. Tomorrow, I thought, would be a celebration of that shared journey. I fell asleep with the wrapped gift on my dresser and a heart full of hope, utterly blind to the quiet heartbreak that awaited me. The drive south to Olympia was under a sky the color of a pearl, the soft, diffused light of a classic Washington spring day. The greens of the landscape were almost impossibly lush, the firs and cedars lining the highway standing like ancient sentinels. My mood matched the quiet beauty of the morning. I was filled with a gentle, hopeful anticipation. I parked in the designated guest lot near the Capitol building, its grand dome a familiar landmark. The grounds were immaculate, with tulips blooming in precise, colorful rows. People were making their way toward the entrance, a mix of state employees in formal business attire and families dressed in their Sunday best. I saw a few familiar faces from the university and the broader environmental community, and we exchanged smiles and nods. The lobby was abuzz with a genteel, official energy. A string quartet played softly in a corner, and sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was an atmosphere of quiet importance, perfectly suited to the occasion. I approached the registration table, the gift tucked under my arm, a warm, genuine smile on my face. Two polite, efficient-looking aides sat behind a table draped in the state flag, checking names on a tablet. "Good morning," I said. "Clara Monroe, checking in." The young woman looked up, her expression pleasant. Then, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Dr. Monroe? Of the Meridian Institute." "That's me," I said, pleased she knew of my work. "I'm Leo Monroe's sister." Her professional smile faltered. She quickly tapped on her tablet, her brow furrowing in concentration. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she began, her fingers scrolling down the screen. "I don't seem to have your name on the guest list." "Oh, that must be a mistake," I replied, my own smile unwavering. "Leo invited me himself. Perhaps you could check again." She exchanged an uneasy glance with her colleague, a young man who suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. She rescrolled the list, then checked a separate list for family members and VIPs. Her confusion deepened into clear discomfort. "I'm very sorry, Dr. Monroe. Your name doesn't appear on any of the lists we were given." A cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach, but I held on to my composure. "I see. Well, there must have been some sort of administrative error. Is there an event coordinator I could speak with?" "Of course, Dr. Monroe." The young woman hurried away, clearly relieved to pass the problem to someone else. While I waited, my eyes scanned the mingling crowd. And then I saw him. Leo. He was standing near the entrance to the main chamber, looking handsome and confident in a dark, well-tailored suit. He was talking to a group of men, laughing at something one of them had said. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, our eyes met across the cavernous lobby. I saw a flash of recognition, of surprise, and then something else. Something that looked like panic. He immediately broke eye contact, turning his back to me so deliberately it was like a physical blow. He gestured animatedly to the man he was speaking with, as if I were nothing more than a stranger in the crowd. In that instant, the cold knot in my stomach turned to ice. This was no mistake. This was not an oversight. This was intentional. The aide returned with an older, harried-looking woman who introduced herself as Miss Dawson, the governor's scheduling director. Her face was a mask of professional regret. Dr. Monroe, she said, her voice low. I've double-checked all the records. The guest list was submitted directly by Mr. Monroe's office last week. I am so terribly sorry for the mix-up, but your name was not included. I see, I said. My voice was steady, betraying none of the chaos churning inside me. Thank you for your time. I stepped away from the table, acutely aware of the curious glances of those nearby. The weight of the gift in my arms was suddenly immense, a foolish, naive symbol of a relationship I had profoundly misunderstood. I walked out of the Capitol building, the bright spring air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs. I found a stone bench in a small, manicured garden overlooking the Sound, the water a placid, indifferent gray. I sat there for a long time, the wrapped map resting on my lap. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. I was 10, and I had spent a month painstakingly cultivating a rare lady slipper orchid I had found deep in the woods, transplanting it to a pot and nursing it with the devotion only a child can muster. I'd entered it into the island's annual garden show. The day of the judging, I discovered Leo, then 8, had helped by watering it with salt water from the beach. The delicate bloom was withered, the leaves brown and curled. When I confronted him, his face crumpled with a confusing mix of guilt and defiance. You always win everything, he'd whispered. Now, 30 years later, the same pattern, a far more public and humiliating execution. I pulled out my phone and, after a moment's hesitation, called the one person who would understand. Dr. Lena Petrova, my mentor from Cornell, now retired and living in Seattle. Lena, it's Claire, I said, my voice finally cracking. Clara? My dear, you sound awful. What's happened? I recounted the story in a flat, emotionless tone. Her silence on the other end of the line was heavy with a sharp, intelligent anger. This is not just a sibling squabble, Clara, she said finally, her voice cutting through my haze of hurt. This is a calculated, public insult. Leo knows exactly who you are in our world. To have you turned away at the door, that sends a message. What do I do, Lena? I whispered, watching a family walk past, the parents holding their children's hands. What would you advise a young scientist on your team who had been publicly undermined by a colleague? She challenged. The answer was immediate. I would tell her that her work speaks for itself. I would tell her that dignity is not the same as passivity. I would tell her that you command respect by respecting yourself first. I need to think, I told Lena. But I'm not just going to drive away. Good, she said firmly. That's not the Clara Monroe I know. As I ended the call, my grief began to crystallize into a quiet, cold resolve. This was no longer just about a family wound. It was about the values that had defined my life's work, integrity, truth, and the courage to stand for them. The walk back to my car was a blur. My mind raced, replaying countless moments I had willfully misinterpreted. The time I'd used my contacts at the National Science Foundation to help him secure a critical grant for his department. The years I'd spent deflecting questions from colleagues about why Leo hadn't pursued more ambitious research. I had always framed it as a choice, a noble dedication to local conservation. I saw now that I had been protecting his ego, and in doing so, had perhaps enabled the very resentment that led to this moment. I sat in my car, the engine off, staring at the Capitol dome. The American flag and the Washington state flag fluttered side by side on the flagpole, symbols of a civic order that felt, at that moment, profoundly disordered. My phone buzzed. It was my father. I took a deep breath and answered. Clara, he said, his voice tight with a fury I hadn't heard in years. I'm inside. They just announced the award recipients. Where are you? Apparently, I wasn't invited, I replied, my voice devoid of self-pity. My name wasn't on the list. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. Then, a weary sigh. I was afraid of this. He's fallen in with a bad crowd, Claire. A man named Gregory Thorne. Gregory Thorne. The name was instantly recognizable. He was a high-powered lobbyist for a consortium of timber and development companies, a man whose entire career was built on discrediting conservation science and promoting deregulation. He was the antithesis of everything my father and I stood for. Thorne is here, my father continued. Sitting with Leo's contingent. He's been whispering in Leo's ear for months, telling him real influence isn't in the field, it's in the halls of power. He's been particularly venomous about your work, calling it elitist obstructionism. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just personal. It was political. Leo hadn't just excluded his sister. He had allowed himself to become a pawn in a larger ideological battle, and I was the symbolic target. I see, I said, the hurt now sharpened by a cold, clear anger. Thank you for telling me, Dad. What are you going to do? He asked, knowing my passivity had its limits. I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to disappear. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my car for 5 full minutes, my mind working with the same analytical focus I applied to a complex ecological problem. I weighed the variables, the potential outcomes, the ethical implications. A public scene would be gratifying, but ultimately counterproductive. It would make me look unstable and detract from the dignity of the award for the other recipients. The response needed to be measured, precise, and unassailable. It needed to be a reflection not of my hurt, but of my principles. I started the car. I didn't drive back to Bainbridge Island. Instead, I drove to a quiet cafe a few miles away. I ordered a black coffee and, sitting in a corner booth, I began to make a plan. It would not involve a dramatic re-entry. It would not involve a confrontation in a crowded lobby. My power wasn't in a uniform or a title that could be announced over a loudspeaker. It was in the quiet, unshakable authority of my work and my integrity. And I decided, in that moment, to wield it. I made one call to my father. Dad, I said, my voice calm and resolute. I need you to do something for me. After the ceremony, during the reception, find a way to get Leo into the small conference room at the end of the West Corridor. Tell him you need to speak with him privately. I'll be waiting there. There was a pause. Are you sure, Claire? That could be explosive. It needs to be, I said. Some things can't be left to fester. He made this public by excluding me. We'll make it right in private. I spent the next hour in that cafe, nursing my coffee and the cold fire of my resolve. I thought about the Amur leopards, creatures of breathtaking power and grace, who moved through their world with a quiet confidence that needed no announcement. Today, I would not be the wounded sister. I would be the biologist, the scientist, the woman who had faced down poachers and politicians and the unforgiving Siberian winter. I would face down my brother with that same quiet strength. The most important ecosystem I needed to protect right now was my own self-respect. The reception was held in a long, sunlit hall adjoining the main chamber. The string quartet had relocated and was now playing something by Vivaldi. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. The atmosphere was one of polite celebration, but I knew that beneath the surface, a different story was unfolding. As arranged, I had entered the Capitol building through a side entrance my father had directed me to, bypassing the lobby entirely. I found the conference room, a small, anonymous space with a polished mahogany table and a dozen leather chairs, and let myself in. The silence was a balm after the turmoil of the morning. I placed the wrapped gift on the center of the table and stood by the window, looking out at the manicured lawns, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. A few minutes later, the door opened. My father stood there, his face grim. He nodded at me, then stepped aside to reveal Leo, who stopped short in the doorway, his expression shifting from curiosity to stunned apprehension. Dad gave him a gentle but firm push into the room and closed the door behind him, leaving us alone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Leo remained by the door, his hand still on the knob, as if contemplating a quick escape. He looked from my face to the gift on the table and back again. I spoke first, my voice even and calm. Congratulations on the award, Leo. It's a significant achievement. Is it? He shot back, the bitterness in his voice startling me. Or is it just a consolation prize because I'm not the great Dr. Clara Monroe? The rawness of his resentment was more potent than I had imagined. Your work stands on its own, I said. I've always believed that. You don't have to believe it, he said, finally letting go of the doorknob and taking a step into the room. He began to pace, his movements agitated. Everywhere I go, every conference, every meeting, oh, you're Claire Monroe's brother. Never just Leo Monroe. Always in relation to you. Do you have any idea what that's like? And that justifies what you did today? I asked, my voice still quiet, letting the question hang in the air. Having me turned away at the door? Humiliating me in front of our colleagues. He had the grace to look away, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. You don't get it, Claire. You just breeze through life. Everything comes so easily to you, the awards, the recognition, the praise from Dad. Easy? The word broke through my composure, a single crack in the ice. Do you think it was easy spending 3 years in a rainforest, getting dengue fever twice, to gather the data that became my dissertation? Do you think it's easy negotiating with corrupt government officials who want to sell off protected land to the highest bidder? Do you think the nights I've spent alone, half a world away from everyone I love, have been easy? I took a step toward him, my voice dropping but gaining intensity. This shadow you think you're living in, I built it. I built it with sacrifice and relentless hard work. I never once apologized for my success, and I never will. But I have never used it against you. Until today, I have only ever tried to use my position to lift you up. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his own anger faltering in the face of mine. The air crackled with 30 years of unspoken feelings. And what about today? I continued, gesturing toward the door. This wasn't just about you wanting a day in the sun. This was about Gregory Thorne, wasn't it? He's out there, in that reception hall, celebrating with you. Leo's face hardened. Thorne understands how the world really works. It's not about counting ferns in the woods, Claire. It's about politics, about influence. And what did that influence cost you today, Leo? I pressed. You let that man, a man whose values are a desecration of everything Dad taught us, convince you to publicly disrespect your own sister. You didn't just exclude me from a party. You compromised your integrity. You let him use our family to send a political message. He flinched as if I'd struck him. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. Let me ask you this, I said, my voice softening slightly. Forget I'm your sister. If any other Lowell Prize laureate, any respected senior scientist in our field, had shown up to honor you today and been turned away, would that have been acceptable? Would that have been a professional way to behave? He looked down at his shoes, the silence his answer. I walked to the table and picked up the gift. I came here today to celebrate you. To honor your work. I found this old map. I thought it represented us. Our shared beginnings. I held it out to him. But it seems we're navigating by different maps now. He looked at the gift in my hands, then at my face, and for the first time, I saw not just resentment, but a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow. It was the look of a man who has just realized he has traded something priceless for something cheap. He didn't take the gift. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, the celebratory energy of the reception hall seeming a world away. He started, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't. I let Thorne's aide handle the list. They said it would be better, simpler, if the focus was just on my work with the state, without the distraction. And you allowed it, I said, not as an accusation, but as a quiet, devastating fact. Before he could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. It was our father. He opened it and looked from Leo's stricken face to my own sad, resolute one. The governor is asking for a family photo with the award recipients, he said gently. I gave a small, weary nod. We have duties to attend to, I said, turning back to Leo. This conversation isn't over. He nodded, his military straight posture from the lobby now gone, replaced by the stoop of a man reckoning with a deep personal failure. As we walked toward the door, he paused. You deserved better, he said quietly, not looking at me. As a colleague. And as my sister. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough, not yet. But it was a start. It was a crack of light in a very dark room. We stepped out of the quiet conference room and back into the bright, noisy celebration, two siblings with a chasm between them, facing the camera with practiced, hollow smiles. The drive home to Bainbridge Island felt longer than the drive to Olympia. The beautiful scenery was just a backdrop to the tumultuous landscape in my mind. The day had been a crucible, burning away the last of my naive optimism about my relationship with my brother and forcing me to confront the painful, complex truth. A week later, a courier delivered a flat, rectangular package to my small cottage. It was the antique map I had left in the conference room. Tucked inside was a handwritten letter on simple, cream-colored stationery. Leo's familiar, angular script filled the page. "Claire," it began. There are no adequate words to express my regret for my actions and my inaction at the award ceremony. What I did was inexcusable, born of a jealousy and insecurity I have allowed to fester for far too long. Your words in that room were harsh, but they were true. I compromised my integrity and, in doing so, I dishonored you, our family, and myself. I have spent the last week thinking about the two maps you spoke of. I realized that in my eagerness to follow a map drawn by men like Thorne, I completely lost sight of my own true north. The letter went on, not with excuses, but with a raw and honest self-assessment. He wrote about his conversation with Dad after I left, and his subsequent decision to resign from his position. He wrote, accepted a non-managerial field position in the North Cascades, a job focused on research, not politics. It's a step down in title, he wrote, but it feels like a step up in every way that matters. He ended the letter by asking if, when I was ready, I would be willing to go for a walk with him on one of the old trails from our childhood. I didn't reply right away. Healing, like the growth of an old-growth forest, cannot be rushed. It requires time and the right conditions. A month later, on a cool, clear autumn day, I drove to a familiar trailhead at the base of Mount Rainier. Leo was already there, leaning against his truck. He looked different, leaner, his face weathered by the sun and wind, his eyes clearer than I had seen them in years. We walked in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the crunch of our boots on the gravel path and the rustle of golden leaves. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and pine. "I've been thinking about that lady slipper orchid," he said suddenly, his voice quiet against the vastness of the forest. I stopped and looked at him. "I haven't thought about that in years." "I have," he said. "I think about it all the time. I was so angry that you'd found it, that you knew how to care for it. I didn't want to kill it. I just wanted it to be less perfect, so that my dandelions might look better next to it." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. "We were raised in a competitive greenhouse, Leo," I said gently. "Dad taught us that only the strongest specimens thrive." "But that's not how a forest works, is it?" he countered, looking up at the canopy, where the branches of giant firs and hemlocks intertwined. "They're all connected underground. The big trees shelter the small ones. They share nutrients. The whole system is stronger because they support each other." We stood there for a long moment, the simple, profound truth of his words settling between us. The road to rebuilding our trust would be long, but for the first time, I felt we were finally on the same path, guided by the same map. We continued our walk, talking not of the past, but of the future, of the wolves returning to the Cascades, of my upcoming project tagging sea turtles in the Pacific, of the simple, profound joy of being in a place where the world felt right and whole. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun painting the Olympic mountains in hues of rose and gold, I reflected on the 4 stars of my own life, the guiding principles of integrity, courage, forgiveness, and the quiet, unshakable love of family. A love that, like a forest, is sometimes messy and chaotic, but is ultimately resilient, interconnected, and essential for survival. My greatest achievement wasn't a prize or a promotion, but the hard-won wisdom that true strength isn't about standing above others, but about learning how to stand beside them, especially when it matters most.